My name is Harper, and I'm 28 years old. Last Thanksgiving, when my mother asked about my wedding plans right after gushing about my sister's perfect ceremony, I delivered the words that shattered our family's facade forever. Had mine last month, you weren't invited. The silence that followed wasn't just shock, it was the sound of 20 years of favoritism, manipulation, and emotional abuse finally being called out. What happened next would expose family secrets that went back generations and prove that sometimes the people who should love you most are your greatest enemies. Before we dive into this wild family revenge story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Hit that like button if you've ever felt like the family scapegoat, and don't forget to subscribe because this story has more twists than a soap opera. Trust me, you'll want to see how karma finally caught up with everyone who wronged me. Growing up in suburban Connecticut, I was always the difficult daughter compared to my golden child sister Melody. She was 3 years younger, prettier, according to family standards, and somehow managed to do no wrong in our parents' eyes. While she got dance lessons, designer clothes, and constant praise, I received criticism disguised as constructive feedback and was expected to be grateful for hand-me-downs and scholarship opportunities I earned myself. The pattern became crystal clear during high school, when Melody crashed Dad's car while drunk at 17. Instead of consequences, she received a brand new Honda Civic because she learned her lesson. When I got a full scholarship to Northwestern University, the family celebration lasted exactly one dinner before the conversation shifted back to Melody's upcoming prom dress shopping. I learned early that achievements meant nothing in our family unless they came from the chosen one. College provided blessed distance from the toxicity, but family gatherings remained minefields. Every holiday brought passive-aggressive comments about my career choices, my appearance, my relationship status. When I graduated summa cum laude and landed a prestigious marketing position in Chicago, Mom's response was, "That's nice, dear. Melody just made cheerleading captain." The pattern was so established that I'd started recording conversations during visits initially just to validate my own sanity. Everything changed 6 months ago when I met David at a work conference. He was everything my family claimed I'd never attract: successful, kind, and genuinely interested in my thoughts and dreams. Our relationship moved quickly, but in the healthiest way possible. He saw through my family's dynamic immediately after our first video call with them, where Mom spent 45 minutes talking about Melody's latest modeling photo shoot while barely acknowledging David's existence. "They treat you like you're invisible," he said afterward. "That's not normal family teasing, that's systematic emotional abuse." Having someone validate what I'd felt for years was simultaneously liberating and heartbreaking. For the first time, I considered that maybe the problem wasn't me being too sensitive as I'd been told my entire life. The breaking point came when Melody announced her engagement to her boyfriend of 8 months. Within hours, my phone exploded with family group chat messages about venue tours, dress appointments, and wedding planning sessions. The speed and enthusiasm were staggering. Mom immediately took a month off work to help plan. Dad opened his checkbook without question, and extended family members started booking travel arrangements. 3 weeks later, when I called to share my own engagement news to David, Mom's response was lukewarm at best. "Oh, how nice. We'll have to meet him properly sometime." Anyway, did I tell you about the amazing caterer we found for Melody's reception? The contrast was so stark that even David, listening on speakerphone, looked shocked. When I mentioned we were thinking about a small ceremony in the fall, Mom immediately launched into how busy they'd be with Melody's wedding preparations and how expensive weddings had become. The real revelation came during what I thought was a casual conversation about guest lists. When I asked if they'd started thinking about who they wanted to invite from their side, Mom became evasive. "Well, honey, we need to be practical about costs. Melody's wedding is quite elaborate, and your father's retirement fund isn't infinite. Maybe you could do something smaller, more intimate, just immediate family." The message was clear: Melody deserved a celebration, I deserved an afterthought. But the final straw came when I discovered through my cousin Jessica that my parents had not only not mentioned my engagement to extended family, but had actively told relatives that I was still figuring things out and not quite ready for marriage yet. Meanwhile, Melody's engagement had been announced in the local newspaper with a full-page spread that Dad had paid for. That night, lying in bed next to David, something crystallized for me. I was done being the family disappointment, done accepting crumbs of affection, and done pretending their treatment was normal. What if we just got married without them? I whispered in the dark. David was quiet. For so long I thought he'd fallen asleep, but then he rolled over and said, "Would that make you happy? Really, truly happy?" For the first time in my adult life, I considered what I actually wanted, instead of what would. Please my family or minimize conflict. I wanted a wedding that celebrated our love without the undercurrent of judgment and comparison that would inevitably taint any event my family attended. I wanted photos where I looked genuinely joyful instead of anxiously trying to manage everyone else's comfort. I wanted a day that was about David and me, not about performing daughterhood for people who'd never appreciated the performance anyway. The planning began immediately and secretly. We decided on a destination wedding in Savannah, Georgia, small, elegant, and 3 states away from my family's drama. My college roommate Sarah would be my maid of honor, David's brother would officiate, and we'd invite only the people who'd actually supported our relationship. The guest list was tiny but filled with genuine love and excitement for our future. As we finalized details, I felt a lightness I hadn't experienced in years. No walking on eggshells, no managing my mother's expectations, no competing with Melody for basic acknowledgement, just pure, uncomplicated joy about marrying my best friend. The contrast with every other major life event was so stark that I finally understood just how damaged our family dynamic had become. The wedding day itself was perfect in ways I'd never imagined possible. Sarah cried during my vows. David's parents welcomed me with genuine warmth, and for 6 hours I existed in a space where I was celebrated simply for being myself. The photographer captured moments of pure happiness that I'd never seen in my own face before. When David and I had our first dance, he whispered, "No regrets," and I realized I'd never been more certain of anything in my life. Returning from our honeymoon felt like stepping back into a parallel universe where my authentic happiness had to be hidden. My family continued their wedding planning frenzy for Melody, sending group photos of dress shopping trips and venue tours that I was notably absent from, not that anyone mentioned my absence. The contrast between my secret joy and their oblivious exclusion created a strange sense of detachment, like watching a movie about people I used to know. The decision to keep our marriage secret initially wasn't about revenge, it was about self-preservation. I needed time to process the magnitude of what had happened and what it meant for my relationships going forward. But as weeks passed, and my family's behavior remained consistently dismissive, something colder and more calculating began to take shape in my mind. David noticed the change first. "You're different since we got back," he observed one evening as I scrolled through yet another family group chat full of Melody's wedding updates. Not bad, different, just harder somehow. He wasn't wrong. The protective numbness that had allowed me to survive childhood in my family was being replaced by something sharper and more purposeful. I started documenting everything with forensic precision. Screenshots of family group chats where my messages were ignored while everyone responded enthusiastically to Melody's. Records of phone calls where Mom would spend an hour discussing Melody's centerpiece choices before abruptly needing to go when I tried to share news about my work promotion. Credit card statements showing thousands spent on Melody's pre-wedding events while my birthday had been acknowledged with a generic card and a gift card to Target. The pattern was so consistent it felt almost criminal. 28 years of systematic emotional neglect and favoritism, all documented in digital black and white. I created a spreadsheet tracking gift disparities, event attendance, and financial support. The data was staggering. Melody had received approximately $15,000 in direct support over the past 2 years alone, while I'd been asked to loan money to help with Dad's temporary car troubles. My breaking point came during a particularly tone-deaf family video call where Mom spent 30 minutes showing me fabric swatches for Melody's bridesmaids' dresses, asking my opinion on colors while simultaneously making it clear that I wasn't being considered as a bridesmaid. "We're keeping the wedding party small," she explained, "just Melody's closest friends from college and her sorority sisters." I'd been Melody's built-in best friend for 25 years, but apparently that relationship had expiration date tied to her social climbing aspirations. "What about Harper as a bridesmaid?" David asked innocently from off-camera. The silence that followed was deafening before Mom laughed uncomfortably and said, "Oh well, you know how these things go. The bride gets to choose, and Melody has very specific ideas about her vision." After we hung up, David and I sat in silence for several minutes. Finally, he said, "I've never seen anything like that. They talk about you like you're a distant acquaintance, not their daughter." His outside perspective confirmed what I'd always felt but had been gaslit into questioning. This wasn't normal sibling rivalry or typical family dynamics. This was systematic exclusion disguised as family harmony. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to confront them, argue my case, or try to earn the love they'd never freely given. Instead, I was going to let them show the world exactly who they really were, and I was going to be ready with receipts when they did. The plan began simply complete radio silence about my marriage, while meticulously documenting every slight, every dismissal, every moment they revealed their true feelings about me. I would let them plan Melody's perfect wedding, let them spend thousands on her happiness while treating me like an afterthought, and then I would give them exactly what they'd always given me: nothing. I started declining family events with polite excuses. Work commitment, prior engagement, not feeling well, all technically true since being around them made me genuinely ill. The most revealing part was how easily they accepted my absence. No follow-up questions, no expressions of disappointment, just relief that they could focus on Melody without the inconvenience of pretending to care about me. Meanwhile, David and I began building our actual chosen family. We hosted dinner parties for friends who celebrated our marriage with genuine joy. We traveled to visit his family, who welcomed me with the warmth I'd always craved. We created traditions that had nothing to do with obligation and everything to do with authentic connection. The contrast was so stark it felt like living in color after a lifetime of black and white. The most liberating moment came when I realized I'd stopped hoping for their approval or affection. The little girl inside me, who'd spent decades performing for love that never came, finally went quiet. In her place was a woman who knew her worth and refused to accept anything less than genuine respect and care. As Melody's wedding date approached, the family's excitement reached fever pitch. Group chats filled with last-minute details, photos from the rehearsal dinner I wasn't invited to, and breathless updates about every perfect moment. I watched it all with the detached fascination of an anthropologist studying a toxic tribe I'd escaped. 2 weeks before the wedding, Mom called with what she probably thought was an olive branch. "Harper, honey, I know we've been busy with wedding planning, but we haven't seen you in months. Why don't you come for dinner this week so we can catch up?" The timing wasn't coincidental with the wedding approaching. They needed their family portrait to look complete for the inevitable photo opportunities. "I'm sorry I can't make it work with my schedule," I replied calmly. "But have a wonderful time. I'm sure everything will be perfect." The phrase carried more weight than she realized. Everything would indeed be perfect for them right up until the moment it wasn't. The 3 months leading up to Thanksgiving became a masterclass in strategic patience. While my family remained blissfully unaware of my marriage, I was busy fortifying my position with allies who would become crucial to what was coming. The most important of these was my cousin Jessica, Dad's niece, who had always been the family truth-teller and was growing increasingly uncomfortable with the obvious favoritism she witnessed. Jessica and I had grown closer over the years, bonded by our shared status as family outsiders, she because she was adopted, me because I was simply unwanted. During a coffee meetup in early October, she finally voiced what we'd both been thinking. "Harper, what they're doing to you isn't normal. I've watched this dynamic for years, and it's honestly disturbing how differently they treat you and Melody. I decided to test the waters. Have you noticed anything specific? I asked, keeping my tone neutral. Jessica laughed bitterly and pulled out her phone. Are you kidding? Last month, your mom posted 17 Facebook updates about Melody's bachelorette party planning, but I haven't seen a single post about you in over a year? And don't get me started on the Christmas gift disparities I've witnessed. The conversation became a 3-hour documentation session where Jessica shared observations I'd never heard from an outside perspective. She'd been keeping mental notes for years, watching my parents' behavior with growing disgust. The worst part, she said, is how they talk about you when you're not there. It's like they've convinced themselves that treating you badly is somehow justified because you're difficult or ungrateful. Jessica's validation was crucial, but even more valuable was her offer to help when the time came. Whatever you're planning, and I know you're planning something because I recognize that, look, I'm here for it. They need to face consequences for how they've treated you. Having a witness with family credentials would prove essential for what was coming. Meanwhile, my relationship with David's family deepened in ways that highlighted just how abnormal my own family dynamic was. His parents, Linda and Robert, had initially been confused by my reluctance to talk about my family or include them in our lives. But as they got to know me better, they began asking gentle questions that revealed their growing concern. Honey, Linda said, during one of our monthly dinner visits, David mentioned that your family doesn't know about your marriage yet. Are you waiting for a special time to share the news? The kindness in her voice nearly broke me. Here was a woman who barely knew me, showing more genuine interest in my happiness than my own mother ever had. I decided to trust them with the truth. Over the course of 2 emotional hours, I explained my family's treatment, showed them some of the documented evidence I'd been collecting, and revealed our decision to exclude them from our wedding entirely. Instead of judgment or advice to work things out, Linda and Robert responded with protective anger that was both validating and healing. No wonder you seemed so guarded when we first met, Robert said quietly. You were waiting for us to show you who we really were before you trusted us. Linda was more direct. What they've done to you is emotional abuse, pure and simple. I'm proud of you for protecting yourself and your marriage from that toxicity. David's family became my first experience with unconditional family love, and their perspective helped me understand that my plan for Thanksgiving wasn't about revenge. It was about finally standing up for myself and demanding the respect I'd always deserved. They didn't try to talk me out of it. Instead, they offered to be there for whatever support I needed afterward. The final piece of my support network came from an unexpected source, my former college roommate Sarah, who had been my maid of honor and was now living in Boston. Sarah had met my family several times over the years and had always been diplomatic about their behavior, but when I told her about the wedding situation and my Thanksgiving plans, her response was swift and fierce. Harper, I have been waiting for this moment for 10 years, she said during our video call. Do you remember sophomore year when your mom came for Parents' Weekend and spent the entire time talking about Melody's high school achievements while barely acknowledging that you'd just made Dean's List? I wanted to say something then, but I didn't want to overstep. Sarah's offer of support came with a surprising revelation. She'd been documenting my family's behavior during visits for years, keeping what she called a concern file because she was worried about the impact on my mental health. I have photos from your graduation where your mom is literally turned away from you in every single picture, looking at her phone while you're receiving awards. I kept them because I thought someday you might need proof that this really happened. Having Sarah's outside documentation felt like striking gold. Her photos and observations would provide crucial third-party evidence that my family's treatment wasn't just in my head or exaggerated by hurt feelings. She also offered something else invaluable, a place to stay after Thanksgiving if I needed space to process whatever fallout occurred. As November approached, I felt more prepared and supported than I'd ever been in my life. My chosen family was solid, my evidence was comprehensive, and my resolve was unshakable. But the most important development was internal. I'd stopped caring about maintaining their comfort or protecting their feelings. For 28 years, I'd been managing their emotions at the expense of my own well-being. that dynamic was about to end permanently. The irony wasn't lost on me that in excluding me from Melody's wedding and treating me as an afterthought, my family had inadvertently given me the greatest gift possible: freedom from the need for their approval. I no longer wanted to be included in their version of family. I wanted to expose it for what it really was. 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, I received the traditional group text about who was bringing what dishes. For the first time in years, I responded promptly and enthusiastically, offering to bring my famous apple pie and asking if there was anything else I could contribute. Mom's surprised but pleased response confirmed that they'd grown comfortable with my absence and hadn't expected my engagement. "How wonderful that you can make it this year," she texted back. "We have so much to catch up on." The oblivious irony of that statement nearly made me laugh out loud. They certainly did have a lot to catch up on, starting with the fact that their difficult daughter had built a beautiful life completely without them. The stage was set, my allies were in place, and my truth was ready to be told. All that remained was deciding exactly how much grace they deserved when their house of cards finally came tumbling down. Thanksgiving morning arrived with a kind of crisp November air that usually filled me with dread about family gatherings. This year felt different. I woke up energized, clear-headed, and ready to finally speak my truth. David squeezed my hand as we pulled into my parents' driveway, noting the cars already there. "You sure you're ready for this?" he asked one final time. I'd never been more certain of anything. The house buzzed with its typical holiday chaos, but the dynamic was immediately apparent. Melody held court in the living room, surrounded by relatives admiring her wedding photos on her phone, while Mom flitted around ensuring everyone had drinks and attention. Dad occupied his usual position in front of the football game, occasionally chiming in with proud father comments about his beautiful bride daughter. My entrance barely registered. A few polite hellos, some comments about how I looked tired and whether I was taking care of myself. Then the conversation immediately returned to dissecting every detail of Melody's perfect wedding. I watched the performance with anthropological fascination, noting how naturally everyone fell into their assigned roles in this family theater. The most telling moment came when Aunt Carol asked about my job, and before I could answer, Mom interrupted with, "Oh, Harper's still doing her marketing thing." "But did you see the professional photos from Melody's ceremony?" The photographer said she was the most photogenic bride he'd ever worked with. My career accomplishments, including the major promotion I'd received last month, were dismissed in favor of Melody's aesthetic appeal. I spent the first 2 hours observing and mentally recording every slight, every dismissal, every moment that proved my point. Jessica caught my eye several times, raising her eyebrows at particularly egregious examples of favoritism. David remained diplomatically quiet, but I could see him taking mental notes of his own. The breaking point came during dinner preparation when Mom assigned tasks. Melody was told to just relax and let us handle everything since she was still recovering from the wedding excitement, while I was handed a list of kitchen duties that would keep me away from the main conversation. The symbolism was perfect. Melody got to be celebrated while I got to be helpful. But the universe provided the perfect setup when Uncle Jim, who'd had several pre-dinner beers, loudly announced, "We need to find Harper a husband. She's not getting any younger, and look how happy marriage has made Melody." The table erupted in laughter and agreement, with various relatives chiming in with dating advice and commentary about my single status. Mom seized the moment to deliver what she probably thought was motherly encouragement. "Harper, honey, you really should put yourself out there more. Look at your sister, she had such a beautiful wedding. When are we going to get to plan one for you?" The condescending tone was exactly what I'd been waiting for. The room fell silent as I set down my fork and looked directly at my mother. "Actually, Mom, you already missed that opportunity." My voice was calm, steady, and carried clearly to every corner of the dining room. "I got married last month. It was beautiful." The silence that followed was deafening. You could hear the football game playing in the background, the furnace clicking on someone's phone buzzing with a text message. Every face around the table showed a different variation of shock, confusion, or disbelief. Mom's face went through several color changes before she managed to speak. "What do you mean you got married? That's not funny, Harper." Her voice had that edge it always carried when I'd done something that disrupted her narrative. I pulled out my phone and calmly scrolled to our wedding photos. David and I were married in Savannah on October 15th. It was everything we dreamed of, intimate, meaningful, and surrounded by people who actually love and support us. I held up a photo of us kissing at the altar, both of us glowing with genuine happiness. The explosion came from multiple directions simultaneously. Mom's voice rose to a near shriek. "How could you do this without telling us? We're your family." Dad sat, frozen his face, cycling through confusion and what looked like hurt. Melody immediately made it about herself. "You got married during my wedding month. How could you be so selfish?" But it was Jessica who spoke the truth that cut through all the noise. "Are you seriously upset that Harper didn't include you in something important? When's the last time any of you included her in anything?" The question hung in the air like a challenge none of them could answer. I stood up slowly, feeling calmer than I had in years. "You want to know why you weren't invited? Because for 28 years you've made it crystal clear that I'm not really part of this family. I'm the backup daughter, the one you tolerate while you worship Melody. Did any of you even notice that I wasn't at her bachelorette party, her bridal shower, any of the wedding planning events?" Mom sputtered protests about being busy and overwhelmed, but I continued with surgical precision. "Last Christmas, Melody got a car. I got a gift card to Target for $50. For her 21st birthday, you threw a party with 30 people and hired a photographer. For mine, you took me to dinner at Applebee's and complained about the prices. Should I continue?" The evidence poured out in a devastating flood: the disparate treatment, the financial inequality, the constant dismissal of my achievements in favor of Melody's mediocre accomplishments. I detailed specific incidents going back years, each one landing like a physical blow to their defensive arguments. "But the real reason you weren't invited," I said, my voice gaining strength with each word, "is because I wanted my wedding day to be joyful. I wanted to be surrounded by people who were genuinely happy for me, not people who would spend the reception talking about how Melody's dress was prettier or how my flowers weren't as expensive as hers." Melody finally found her voice. "You're being ridiculous. We love you." But even as she said it, her tone carried the same dismissive quality it always had. She couldn't even pretend convincingly. I looked around the table at faces showing everything from guilt to anger to complete bewilderment. "The sad part is you probably do think you love me. But you love the idea of me, the grateful daughter who accepts scraps and never complains about being second best. You don't actually know who I am because you've never been interested enough to find out." The room erupted again, but this time I was done listening. I'd said what needed to be said, exposed what needed to be exposed, and finally spoken the truth that had been suffocating me for decades. The rest was just noise. The chaos that followed my revelation was both exactly what I'd expected and somehow worse than I'd imagined. Mom immediately went into damage control mode, her voice taking on that shrill, defensive tone I remembered from childhood arguments. "Harper, you're being dramatic and hurtful. We've always treated you and Melody equally." The lie was so blatant that several relatives exchanged uncomfortable glances. Dad, meanwhile, seemed to be processing everything in slow motion. "You got married and didn't tell us," he kept repeating as if saying it enough times would make it make sense. "We're your parents. We should have been there." The wounded confusion in his voice might have moved me once, but now it just highlighted how little he understood about the relationship we actually had. Melody, true to form, made everything about herself. "This is so typical of you, Harper. You couldn't stand that I had a perfect wedding, so you had to find a way to make yourself the center of attention." Her voice carried that familiar whine she'd perfected as a child when she wasn't getting her way. "You've ruined Thanksgiving. How am I supposed to enjoy my newlywed holidays knowing you did this behind our backs?" The most telling reaction came from the extended family. Aunt Carol sat in stunned silence, clearly doing mental calculations about all the family events and conversations she'd witnessed over the years. Uncle Jim, now completely sober, kept looking between my parents and me with dawning comprehension. Cousin Jessica finally spoke up. "Wait, so Harper's been excluded from Melody's wedding planning for months, and now you're upset that she excluded you from her actual wedding? Does that seem fair to anyone else?" Mom whirled on. "Jessica, with fury. "This doesn't concern you. This is between Harper and her family." But Jessica didn't back down. "Actually, it does concern me. I've watched this dysfunction for years, and honestly, I'm proud of Harper for finally standing up for herself." That's when the real ugliness emerged. Mom's mask slipped completely as she turned back to me with venom I'd rarely seen even from her. "You've always been jealous of your sister. Always resentful and bitter because she's successful and beautiful and people actually want to be around her." The words hit the air like poison, confirming every suspicion I'd ever had about how she really saw me. But instead of the crushing pain those words would have caused years earlier, I felt something unexpected relief. Finally, the truth was out. No more pretending this was normal family dynamics or sibling rivalry. This was a mother telling one daughter she was inferior to the other, and everyone in the room could hear it. David, who had been quietly observing the meltdown, finally spoke. His voice was calm but carried unmistakable steel. "I think we should leave now." He stood up and moved to stand behind my chair, his presence both protective and supportive. "Harper, you've said what you needed to say. We don't need to stay for the rest of this." But I wasn't quite finished. The floodgates had opened and 28 years of suppressed truth was pouring out. "You want to know what's really sad, Mom? I spent my entire childhood trying to earn your love and approval. I thought if I was smart enough, successful enough, good enough, maybe you'd see me the way you see Melody. But you never did, and you never will." I pulled out my phone again and scrolled to a particular photo one Sarah had taken at my college graduation. "Look at this picture. Really look at it." I held it up so the whole table could see. "I'm receiving the Dean's Award for Academic Excellence, and where are you looking?" In the photo, Mom was turned completely away from the stage, scrolling through her phone while I stood at the podium. Melody wasn't even there that day, but somehow she was still more important than my actual achievements. The photographic evidence hit different than my words had. Seeing their behavior frozen in time, undeniable and stark, created a moment of reckoning that verbal arguments couldn't achieve. Several relatives leaned in to look at the photo, and I watched comprehension dawn on their faces. Melody, perhaps realizing that the family narrative was crumbling around her, tried a different tactic. "Harper, I never asked to be treated differently. I'm sorry if you felt left out, but that doesn't mean you should hurt Mom and Dad like this." It was classic Melody positioning herself as the reasonable victim, while avoiding any accountability for enabling the dynamic. "You're right," I said, looking directly at her. "You never asked for preferential treatment. But you never questioned it either. In 28 years, you never once stood up for me, never once said, hey, maybe Harper should be included too. Never once acknowledged how obviously different our treatment was. Your silence made you complicit." The accusation hit home because it was undeniably true. Melody had benefited from the favoritism for so long that she'd never considered its cost to me. Her face crumpled as she realized that her hands weren't entirely clean in this family dynamic. Dad finally found his voice, and it carried a tone I'd never heard from him before, something that might have been genuine remorse. "Harper, we never meant to make you feel unwanted. We love you." But even as he said it, he couldn't seem to find specific examples of how that love had been demonstrated. "I know you think you love me, Dad, but love isn't just a feeling, it's actions, choices, priorities. And your actions have consistently shown me exactly where I rank in this family." My voice was steady, matter of fact. "I'm not angry anymore. I'm just done pretending this is something it's not." The fight seemed to drain out of everyone simultaneously. Mom collapsed into her chair, tears streaming down her face, as the magnitude of what she'd lost, what she'd thrown away, began to sink in. Dad stared at his hands, perhaps finally seeing the pattern I'd lived with my entire life. Melody looked between her parents and me, seemingly realizing for the first time that her perfect family wasn't actually perfect for everyone in it. I stood up, David beside me, and looked around the table one last time. I'm thankful for a lot of things this year: my husband, my career, my real friends, and finally finding the courage to stop accepting less than I deserve. I hope someday you can be happy for me too. The weeks following Thanksgiving brought a predictable cycle of family drama that confirmed everything I'd suspected about their priorities. Within days, I received a barrage of texts ranging from Mom's tearful apologies to Melody's angry accusations about destroying the family. Dad's messages were the most painful because they seemed genuinely confused about how things had gotten so bad. But the pattern that emerged was telling. Even their attempts at reconciliation centered around my obligation to fix what they'd broken. Mom's first text read, "Harper, I'm devastated that you felt unloved. Can we please talk and work this out? I don't want to lose my daughter." But when I responded asking for specific changes she was willing to make, her next message revealed her true mindset. "I think we both said things we didn't mean. Maybe we could start over and put this behind us." The suggestion that my documented evidence was equivalent to her decades of favoritism showed she still didn't understand the magnitude of the problem. Melody's approach was more direct, and in its honesty, more helpful for my healing process. "You embarrassed our entire family on Thanksgiving. Everyone is talking about it, and Mom has been crying for days. I hope you're happy with what you've accomplished." Her inability to acknowledge any validity to my concerns confirmed that she remained incapable of seeing beyond her own perspective. The most revealing response came from extended family members who had witnessed the confrontation. Aunt Carol called 2 days later with an apology that stunned me. "Harper, I owe you an enormous apology. I've watched your parents treat you differently for years and told myself it wasn't my business. But seeing your pain on Thursday made me realize how wrong I was to stay silent." Her validation meant more than any apology from my immediate family could have. Jessica became an unexpected source of ongoing support and intelligence. She reported back on family conversations where my parents alternated between genuine remorse and indignant victimhood. "Your mom keeps saying she doesn't understand what Harper wants from us," Jessica told me during one of our coffee meetings. "But when my mom suggested family therapy, your dad said they shouldn't have to change their whole dynamic just because Harper is oversensitive." The conversations proved that even in crisis they couldn't fully accept responsibility for their choices. Meanwhile, my marriage continued to flourish in ways that highlighted just how toxic my family environment had been. David and I established new holiday traditions with his family, creating the kind of warm, inclusive celebrations I'd always craved. Linda and Robert treated me with a consistency of affection and respect that helped heal wounds I didn't even know were still bleeding. Their home became a sanctuary where I could experience unconditional acceptance for the first time in my adult life. The most unexpected development was reconnecting with childhood friends who had witnessed my family dynamic growing up. Sarah organized a dinner party with several women from our high school group, and as the evening progressed, story after story emerged about how obviously different my treatment had been. "I remember your sweet 16, my friend Emma said quietly. Your parents forgot it was your birthday until I asked where the party was. Then they scrambled to take you to dinner while talking about Melody's upcoming dance recital the entire time." These women had carried concern for me for over a decade, watching from the sidelines as my family systematically undermined my self-worth. Their validation was both healing and heartbreaking. Healing because it confirmed my perceptions weren't distorted, heartbreaking because it meant the damage had been visible to others for years. 3 months after Thanksgiving, I received an unexpected call from Dad. His voice was different, smaller, more uncertain than I'd ever heard it. "Harper, I've been thinking about what you said, and I want you to know that I've started seeing a therapist. I'm trying to understand how we got here." It was the first acknowledgement that the problem might require more than surface-level solutions. "That's good, Dad," I replied, meaning it. "I hope it helps you." But when he asked if we could meet for coffee to start rebuilding, I had to be honest, I'm not ready for that yet. I need to see sustained change, not just good intentions. The conversation that followed was the most honest we'd ever had. Dad admitted he'd never noticed the disparity in treatment because he'd been raised in a family where favoritism was normal. "My father had a golden child too," he said quietly. "I guess I thought that was just how families worked." His willingness to examine his own childhood patterns gave me hope that genuine change might be possible even if it would take time. Melody's evolution was slower, but ultimately more surprising. 6 months after Thanksgiving, she called me crying. Harper, I think I'm starting to understand what you meant. My mother-in-law keeps comparing me to her other daughter and it's making me crazy. I never realized how awful it feels to always come up short in comparison. The irony wasn't lost on me, that she had to experience similar treatment to comprehend what I'd endured for decades. I'm sorry, she continued, through tears. I'm not asking you to forgive me right away, but I want you to know that I see it now. And I'm going to do better, if you'll let me. It was the first genuine apology I'd ever received from her, and while I wasn't ready to fully trust it, I appreciated the acknowledgement. A year later, as David and I planned our first wedding anniversary celebration, I reflected on the transformation my life had undergone. I'd lost a family that had never truly valued me, and gained a chosen family that celebrated my authentic self. My career flourished without the constant drain of managing family drama. My marriage deepened as I learned to trust that I was genuinely wanted and appreciated. The most profound change was internal. I'd stopped waiting for external validation to feel worthy of love and respect. The little girl who had spent decades trying to earn her parents' approval had finally been replaced by a woman who knew her own value and refused to accept anything less than genuine care and consideration. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and your own well-being? Sometimes the people who should protect us the most end up being the ones we need protection from. If this story resonated with you, please share it with someone who might need to hear that they're not alone in their struggle. Don't forget to like this video if you believe everyone deserves to be truly seen and valued by their family. And subscribe for more stories about finding strength in difficult family situations. Thank you for letting me share my journey with you, and remember, you deserve to be loved for exactly who you are, not who others expect you to be. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give ourselves is the courage to walk away from relationships that diminish our light, and I hope my story reminds you that your happiness and self-worth are always worth fighting for.